There's a question that has quietly unnerved scholars for over a century, and it goes like this. The ancient Egyptians had a god of the sun. The ancient Greeks had a god of the sun. The Romans did. The Aztecs did. The Vedic Indians did. The Norse did. The Incas did. They never met. They shared no texts, no trade routes that would carry theology, no common ancestor who whispered the same story to all of them. And yet, independently, on every inhabited continent, in civilizations separated by thousands of miles and thousands of years, human beings looked up at the same sky and invented not just the same idea, but often the same personality. The sun god is powerful, masculine, associated with order, kingship, and justice. Every time, almost without exception. Now, the easy explanation is coincidence, or maybe ancient astronauts, or maybe the answer is something so much stranger, something that lives inside you, right now, shaping the way you see the world, that once you understand it, you will never look at religion, mythology, or even your own instincts quite the same way again. Let's be precise about what we're actually observing, because the pattern is more specific than people realize. It's not just sun gods. Across independently developed mythologies, you find the same archetypes appearing with remarkable consistency. You get a sky father, a patriarch who rules from above, associated with storms and law. The Greeks called him Zeus. The Romans called him Jupiter. The Vedic Indians called him Deus Peter. The Norse called him Tyr. Linguists have actually traced the root word. Deus, meaning sky or shining, appears in all four names, separate cultures, same syllable. You get an earth mother, fertile, cyclical, associated with death and renewal, Gaia, Nerthus, Pachamama, Prithvi. You get a trickster, a figure who exists outside moral law, who steals fire or wisdom from the gods and gives it to humans, who represents chaos as the engine of change. Loki, Prometheus, Anansi, Coyote, Raven. You get a dying and rising god, a deity who descends into the underworld, is killed or dismembered, and comes back. Osiris, Dionysus, Balder, Persephone, Inanna. You get a great flood. You get a world tree or cosmic axis connecting heaven, earth, and underworld. You get a final battle at the end of time. The question isn't whether these patterns exist. They clearly do. Mythologists have catalogued them for over 100 years. The question is, why? And here's where the standard explanations start to crack. The first explanation is diffusion, that these stories spread through trade and migration. But dying and rising gods appear in pre-Columbian Mesoamerica and in ancient Mesopotamia independently before contact. The flood myth appears in ancient Sumer and in the oral traditions of Australian Aboriginal peoples, separated by 60,000 years of cultural divergence. Diffusion can explain some convergence. It cannot explain all of it. The second explanation is environment, that similar landscapes produce similar stories. The sun is powerful everywhere, so sun gods are powerful everywhere. This is partly true, but it doesn't explain the specifics. Why is the trickster almost always associated with intelligence and fire? Why does the dying god almost always involve dismemberment rather than some other form of death? The environmental explanation gets you to sky god exists. It doesn't get you to the personality. So we need a third explanation. And to find it, we have to go somewhere mythology scholars spent decades refusing to look. Inside the human brain. In the 1960s, a Swiss psychiatrist named Carl Jung proposed something that most of his contemporaries found either profound or absurd, that the human unconscious contains inherited structures, patterns of meaning he called archetypes, that are universal across all human beings regardless of culture. The academic world largely rejected this as mysticism. You can't inherit a story, they said. Genetics doesn't work that way. But here's what's happened in the decades since. Cognitive scientists, evolutionary biologists, and neuroscientists have started finding evidence that Jung was, in a structurally important sense, correct, though not for the reasons he thought. The field that emerged is called cognitive science of religion, and its central finding is this: human brains are not blank slates. They come preloaded with inference systems, cognitive modules that were shaped by millions of years of evolution to solve specific survival problems. And those modules don't just affect how we navigate the physical world. They generate certain kinds of stories, automatically, everywhere they appear. Consider what researchers call the Hypersensitive Agency Detection Device, or HADD, a somewhat clunky acronym for one of the most important things your brain does. Imagine your ancestors on the savannah 200,000 years ago. They hear a rustle in the grass. There are two possibilities. It's the wind or it's a predator. The cost of assuming wind when it's actually a predator is death. The cost of assuming predator when it's actually wind is a wasted moment of fear. Evolution is brutally efficient at this kind of calculation. The brain that systematically assumed agency, that something intended the rustle, was the brain that survived. The result is that you are the descendant of people who were cognitively biased toward perceiving intention, mind, and personhood in the world around them. You do this automatically. You can't turn it off. When a storm destroys a harvest, your brain's agency detection system doesn't say pressure differential. It reaches for something that intended it: a personality, a will, a god. And this isn't just speculation. Developmental psychologists have shown that children, before any religious instruction, spontaneously attribute intentional design to natural phenomena. They assume the mountains exist for a reason. They assume someone made them. This tendency, which researchers call teleological bias, appears cross-culturally before socialization can account for it. But that's just the origin of gods in general. It doesn't explain why the same gods keep appearing. For that, we need to go one layer deeper. Evolutionary anthropologists like Pascal Boyer and Harvey Whitehouse have shown that the gods and spirits that spread most successfully across human cultures share a specific cognitive profile. They are minimally counterintuitive. They violate exactly one or two of your intuitive expectations about how the world works, while conforming to all the others. A rock that speaks violates your intuitions about rocks, but not about speakers. A ghost who passes through walls but still wants revenge violates your physical intuitions, but conforms completely to your social ones. These beings are memorable precisely because they're almost but not quite normal. They snag in the mind. And here's the key: the space of minimally counterintuitive beings is not infinite. It's actually quite constrained. There are only so many ways to be almost, but not quite, human. Which means different cultures, working from the same cognitive hardware, exploring the same constrained possibility space, will independently converge on many of the same types. The trickster is cognitively inevitable. A being with superhuman knowledge, but recognizably human desires. Specifically, the desire to subvert the social order. That combination is just inherently memorable. It will be reinvented everywhere. The dying god reflects the deep structure of how human minds process absence and return. We are extraordinarily sensitive to social loss. The disappearance of a person who matters to us. A god who dies activates our social cognition in ways that make the story emotionally unforgettable. And seasonal metaphor does the rest. The return of spring is the return of the dead. The Skyfather reflects something about dominance hierarchies that goes back before our species. Primates track social rank obsessively. Above means power, everywhere in the animal kingdom. A ruling god above you is not a poetic choice. It is the only place your nervous system thinks power could possibly reside. So here's where we have to stop and sit with what this actually means. If the gods humans invented aren't products of revelation or coincidence or ancient memory, if they are outputs of the specific cognitive architecture that natural selection built into Homo sapiens, then what does that tell us? It tells us that the gods are, in some meaningful sense, real. Not real in the way a stone is real in the way that grief is real, or language is real, or justice is real, as structures that exist in the shared cognitive space between human minds, arising from the same underlying hardware, shaping behavior in profound and persistent ways. And it tells us something more uncomfortable. If the same cognitive biases that generated the Skyfather also generate the unconscious sense that power should come from above, from authority, from hierarchy, if the same agency detection system that created the trickster also makes you see human faces in clouds and intention behind coincidence, then the question stops being about ancient history. The question becomes, which of your current beliefs are the product of the same cognitive shortcuts that built the pantheon of ancient Rome? You were not born a blank slate. You were born with inference systems that were optimized for a world your ancestors lived in 200,000 years ago. Those systems are generating your experience of meaning, causality, authority, and pattern right now, in this moment, as you listen to this. The same architecture that independently built Osiris and Dionysus and Balder is the architecture that makes certain political leaders feel godlike. That makes certain coincidences feel like fate. That makes certain patterns feel like they must mean something. Jung thought we inherited symbols. What we actually inherited was the machinery that generates symbols, and the machinery runs constantly. Whether you're in ancient Egypt or a modern apartment, whether you believe in gods or you don't, you can't turn off HADD. You can't stop your teleological bias. You can't fully audit the agency you're perceiving into the world. But you can know it's happening. And knowing it's happening is, depending on how you look at it, either the most sobering thing you'll ever learn about yourself, or the closest thing we have to a universal human religion.